Good to see everybody out this morning. We're continuing our study today in Acts chapter 19. We've got some things we want to discuss about chapter 19 this morning that, as I told some earlier, you might want to fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be a good one. So hold on. Before we do that, let's take a look at the chapter titles. What are we going to, the question 1, churches established is? Chapter 2, Jesus' ascension? Okay, death of Ananias and Sapphira? 5. All right, Stephen's arrest and death? 6 and 7. Okay, conversion of Saul? 9. Okay, conversion of Cornelius? Conversion of the eunuch?
8.
The eunuch?
8.
Okay, all right, there you go. I heard 18. I thought, I ain't got the, don't think so. First persecutions?
3 and 4.
All right, Christians first in Antioch.
11.
Okay, persecutions of Judea. I'm listening.
12.
All right, let's do 12. All right. Paul's first journey. 13 and 14. Jerusalem conference. Nick, what is it? What? Okay. What is it? 15. All right. Conversion of the jailer.
16.
There you go. Paul's second journey.
17.
All right. Paul's third journey. 19 and 20. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, chapter 19 is a lot said that's not said. Okay, and I want to share that with you today because there's a lot of things that we can pull together from other passages that's going to help us better understand what's going on. How long is Paul in Ephesus? 3 years. 3 years he's in Ephesus, okay? And in that length of time, there's a lot of things goes on. Now, the part that Luke tells us about relates to what? What do we know? What does Luke tell us about while he's in Ephesus? What happens to begin with? Paul preaches to the Jews, and what happens? Yep. And then what? And he moves his point of reference from the synagogue to another location. Okay? Continues there for another period of 2 years. All right? In this length of time, and in this 3-year time frame, hey, Zach, I didn't see you back there, buddy. Glad you're here. In that length of time, there's writings that's going on, and we've said multiple times that the other 12 to 13 books that we have, if he writes Hebrews, and we'll talk about that, but anyway, the other books have their beginning here. Okay? For example, if you recall how when Paul left on beginning of the third journey, he left from Antioch of Syria, and how did he progress? He leaves Antioch of Syria, he passes through Galatia, touching base at Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, and ends up back at Ephesus. Sorry, hit the wrong one. All right, and he ends up back in Ephesus. Now, this is in Luke. We take a look at chapter, I believe, about 18. And in the space of about, if we recall, we put it up on the map, verses 23 and 24, he travels 1,500 miles. All right? We can't begin to keep up with everything that's going on in that length of time. But when he gets back to Ephesus on his third journey, at the very beginning, because he has just circulated through the region of Galatia and back through those churches, there's a better and even chance that not long after he gets back to Ephesus, he sits down and pens the letter to the Galatians. Now, what church did he go to? Well, you can guess one of 4 that we know of at least. All right? But there's a very real possibility it went to all of them, circulating around by courier so that it could be understood. What was the main? Well, let's talk about that. With Galatians being there, there's some main things that he stresses in the book of Galatians. If you remember, Galatians chapter 1 talks about, I'm amazed that you're so soon leaving. The first few verses of chapter 1, Paul's just forward. He's been through this region now 3 times. And he's amazed at how soon they're leaving the principles that he's taught them. Who's doing it?
Judaized teaching.
Exactly. Acts 15. You remember we talked about the Jerusalem conference, the things that took place there, the letter that was written. It's circulated right here. And there's people struggling with that. There's people struggling with that situation, and they're influencing, and once Paul's gone, who's gonna fight with him? It's hard to argue with yourself. Okay?
If you come back today, he'd sure get surprised.
Well, yeah, but I think you know how to handle it. But anyway, Paul's then a lot of the work in the book of Galatians deals with Paul's defense of his apostleship. No question about that. Affirmation that spiritual freedom is in Christ through the gospel, not through the law. That strikes directly at what the Judaizing teachers are teaching, because they're trying to keep people under the law. And so it contradicts that totally. This freedom should not be, though, considered as permission to give free rein to the desires of the flesh. You just can't let things go the way you want them. There's rules. There's what God expects out of us, all of us, and he's communicating that to him. That, in a nutshell, is what Paul writes to the Christians in Galatia when he gets there. But there's more. There's more. What else happens to Paul while he's in Ephesus?
He run out and stoned him. Beat him.
No. What else happens to Paul while he's in Ephesus? What about the goddess Diana? Now we're talking. So the riot takes place, and this is what takes place. If you take a look with me, turn to 1 Corinthians. You might want to hold your finger there back. We'll get back to Acts in a little bit. But turn to 1 Corinthians a minute, because while he's in Corinth, chapter 1 points out that well, I read it just a minute ago, and now I can't see it. But anyway, he gets word from the house of Chloe in 1 Corinthians that there are divisions among them.
Verse 11.
All right, thank you. Verse 11, I've been informed concerning the brethren of Chloe's people that there are quarrels among you, things that are going on. Paul writes the first letter to the Corinthian brethren from Ephesus. Okay? It's communicated to them. Chapter 16, on to the end of the book, verse 5, Paul planned to pass through Macedonia and come to Corinth anyway. But he thought this letter and this stuff needed to be corrected before he got there. And so he pens the letter and sends it to them. More than likely, the courier is Titus, because we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to 2 Corinthians. But he is wanting to spend the winter in Corinth. And so what's going to happen is he leaves from Ephesus. He's going to travel up through to get to Corinth. He's going to travel up through Macedonia, going up through Troas. In Macedonia, you remember the three churches up there, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. He's going to pass through that, talking to those three congregations before he gets to Corinth. In the meantime, he sends the letter directly from Ephesus to Corinth via Titus. Okay? Via Titus, so that he can understand, he can communicate the things that are going on. Now, what's he going to say? Well, Chloe says that the household of Chloe says there's divisions among them, and there's things that need to be talked about and handled that way. Just let me look at my notes here a minute. Okay. And so he shares that with them, but an overview of 1 Corinthians 1 talks about things along this line. Now, what I want to stress, what was one of the key things that come to our mind about the book of 1 Corinthians? What's one of the issues that just generally pops out at us? We talk about it a lot.
They're all divided up.
Yeah, why? Over what?
Paul and Apollos, because they set themselves off.
Okay? And so they're following, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos. One of the issues that talked about, the point 1 up here, most of the problems at Corinth dealt with people problems, not with doctrinal problems. People not behaving themselves. People not doing things the way they ought to be doing. Chapter 5, I believe it is, we've got a guy living in immorality. That needs to be corrected. That needs to be fixed and stopped. And Paul makes it no uncertain terms. This is sinful. It's stuff that's going on that even the Gentiles don't do. And you're condoning it and saying it's okay. It's got to stop. It's got to get cleaned out and fixed. Paul really writes a letter here. He don't want to. He doesn't. In fact, it hurts him that he does have to write it, but he does. Okay? And he makes it no uncertain terms. This has got to be fixed. They're not conducting themselves in the worship as they should. Bringing meals, doing whatever. Those topics are addressed in 1 Corinthians. Problems that's got to be solved, and they got to be taken care of, but in a proper way. Solved with love, not with a club. Okay? Not with a club. Love is the best way to solve these issues, and that's what takes place. This happens in the early stages of while he is in Ephesus. And it talks about, as he continues that, and all these things that he deals with, if you go over to chapter 16 of 1 Corinthians, and we touch base on this, I think, Wednesday evening, his plan was to get there, as we've said, to spend the winter with him. And while he's in Ephesus, and that's how we know he's there, verse 8, I shall remain in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door and effective service is open to me, and there are many adversaries. This is prior to the riot. When he pins that, he's thinking things are good at this point. I'm not going to, and then the riot takes place. And it gets ugly real quick for him, and so he has to stay there. So as he's in there, and as we've already talked about and we've shown in Acts 19, the riot takes place. The riot is there, and it takes over, and the assembly is dismissed, and things kind of settle for a little bit. However, it did not go without leaving a mark. This thing really affected Paul personally. I mean, he's got all this going on. 2 Corinthians chapter, I think it's, hold on. Chapter 1, verse 8 in 2 Corinthians points out that this thing is so severe that he did not want them to be unaware that the afflictions which came on us in Asia, Ephesus, that we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even for life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves, in order that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raised the dead. Paul thought he was going to die. That's how bad the thing was in Ephesus. Okay, and he communicates that to them, and so forth. All right, so as this takes place, the events happen in 1 Corinthians. He writes this to them. Titus has carried that to them, but the weight of that letter was really bothersome to Paul. He didn't want to have to say what he had to say to this brethren, but he knew the right was the right, and he was going to do it, and he did. Okay? So what happens? Nick, where are you, buddy? Read for me the first 3 verses of chapter 20.
After the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. Now when he had gone over that ring and encountered them with many words, he came to Greece, and stayed 3 months. And when the Jews plotted against him, as he was about to sail to Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. Okay, great. Now there's a lot of things covered right here, and I want to share that with you. In those 3 short verses, here's what takes place. Okay, he's just the riot, the uproar is over. Verse 1. Okay, and it says that he meets with the disciples for a little while, and when he exhorted them, he's taking his leave from them and heading for then Macedonia. Macedonia is up, on the map at the top. But in the meantime, as he's trying to get there, he's still got this problem on his mind about what he's written to Corinth. He's looking for Titus. He gets to Troas looking for Titus, and Titus isn't there. Okay? He continues moving on, and he gets into the Macedonian area, and then they hook up. And we'll talk about that. Let me show you that.
But let me show you the summary of 2 Corinthians just real quick before we do this. In a nutshell, what happens, 1 Corinthians, the book of 1 Corinthians is well received. I mean, you would think, that with the hammer he come down with them on, there'd be some people squirming. And there probably was. But it's the idea that they accepted what Paul had to say and corrected it. And that's what 2 Corinthians is all about, because it's going to tell them now, okay, now based on this and based on what's happened and what you've done, here's how you act. Here's how you accept this. Don't hold it over the man's head. Don't beat him to death with the fact that you've messed up, and accept him, understand that he's corrected it, and move on, okay? The second part about 2 Corinthians is good, and Paul clearly tells us this, is God furnishes comfort to his servants by giving them a glorious ministry. That was personally for Paul. He needed that. He needed that. He'd been really worked over in Ephesus from the riot. He'd been really worked over personally by writing 1 Corinthians. And now in 2 Corinthians, after he hears back from Titus that they've met and Titus has brought him word that it's been well received and everything's good, Paul writes 2 Corinthians. And he corresponds and sends this back by him, back by Titus, so that they can get a full picture of, you've done it right. You've listened, you've fixed it, you've done it right, and I'm going to be there soon. So just stay tuned. I'm going to be there, and I'm going to spend 3 months with you, as we see there in verse 3 of Acts 19. Okay? So, we know in 2 Corinthians 16, it's talking about the collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem. He's telling them to have that ready for him. He's going to pick that up and take it. And then, again, Paul defends his own apostolic ministry and authority. That's just nutshells. I mean, I can't go into detail on every one of the books. I got to put it into big captions here for us to understand what's going on. So, as that takes place, then that's the overview of chapter 19. Bear with me just a second, because I want to get to where we are in 20. All right. Okay. Now, time frame wise, as what we're speaking of, we're in the range as Paul makes the trip up through Macedonia and back down to Greece, where Corinth is. Okay, we're at AD 56. Okay, 3 years now, counting the time he's in Ephesus, travel time, etc., etc. Okay, he's back in Corinth where he'll spend the winter at AD 56. Okay, so on a map so you can see it: Ephesus, Macedonia, the 3 churches that are up there: Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea. By the way, who did we leave in Philippi? Acts 16, last verse. Who did we leave there? Us or they?
Luke.
There you go. Thank you. Luke is left. Luke is still in Philippi, and that's going to be. We're going to catch this here just in a minute as Paul makes his route. He gets down now to Corinth, and that's where he's going to spend his time, as we see there. Now, as Nick read, when we get to verse 3 there of Acts 19, that they spent 3 months there, and the plot was formed against him by the Jews, so that he went about to set sail to Syria, but determined to return through Macedonia. All right, the winter he spends in Corinth, and guess what he does in Rome, there? Romans is written in that 3-month time frame, as he's there in Corinth at that time. Probably during the 3-month stay, Romans 15, verse 23 to 33, points out, and he tells these folks, so I plan to get to Rome. I want to come to Rome to see you. Did he establish a church in Rome?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because he stayed behind.
In Rome?
And yes.
In Rome?
Yes.
Had he been to Rome before?
No.
My point exactly. My point exactly. He hadn't been to Rome. So Paul didn't establish the church in Rome. but who had been.
So it was on the day of Pentecost.
was on the day of Pentecost.
Okay, but who also came down from Rome because the emperor told him to leave. You got it. Tell me. Yep, it's a man and his wife.
Aquila, Priscilla.
There you go. There you go. Priscilla and Aquila. That's right. They came on. So there's work already going on. Okay, and so Paul writes the letter to them in Rome because he's planning to get there. And the reason we know that it's written from Rome is in Romans 16, verse 1. Cenchrea. You remember we said Cenchrea was one of the harbors for Corinth on the east. And it says in verse 1, Cenchrea was on the eastern seaport of Corinth. And in that verse, it talks about that he's sending the letter to them and is going to send it by the hands of Phoebe. Let me get over there to it real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. 2 Corinthians chapter 16. I'm sorry, chapter... Oh, what am I talking about? I'm in the wrong book. Sorry, Romans 16. And he's gonna send it by this route. 16, about verse 1. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea, and that you receive her in the Lord in the manner worthy of all the saints, that you help her in whatever matter she may have need of you, for she herself also has been a helper of many, and of myself also as well. Chances are, doesn't flat out say it, but this is the only time we see her name mentioned, okay, in Scripture. Chances are she's the courier that takes the letter to Rome, for Paul. Paul's ultimately going to get there, but not the way he's planning at this point. He's going to get there as a prisoner, not because he's able to travel freely. So, as Nick read for us in verse 3, there's a plot that's organized against him as Paul gets back to Corinth and gets back there. The Jews, Paul originally was going to set sail from Corinth and go back back kind of like the way he did on the second journey back through Ephesus, etc. But the plot comes up. They're laying in wait for him at the harbor, and he says, "Oh well, I'll just fix that." And so what he does, he makes a U-turn and goes back by land up through Macedonia over to Philippi, and that way. Okay. Now I made mention a while ago, as he makes this trip back and he gets to Philippi, that there's a key person that joins the travel. All right, who is it? Let's pick up a little bit. Let's see who's here and who's not. Okay, verse 4. And he was accompanied by Sopater of Berea, the son of Pyrrhus, and by Aristarchus and Secundus, and the Thessalonians at Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy and Tychicus and Trophimus of Asia. And these had gone ahead and were waiting for us at Troas. Who joins the party?
Two.
Is it Luke here?
Exactly, because he's at Philippi, and that's where they launch from, and Luke jumps with them and makes the move. So the rest of them have traveled on ahead to Troas. Let me show you right here. Troas. Right here is Troas. And so they travel and they all hook up together then at Troas and continue the move on. So things are happening. Things are really moving as far as what we see both in writings and in what takes place as far as Paul's travel is concerned. Not much is mentioned to us as far as Luke is concerned about anything other than the plot to take Paul's life in Corinth, and he makes a move. Not much update as far as what is going on, but you can understand that with the letters that have been written, and as he's written 2 Corinthians back to them, it was a good meeting. It was good because things have happened and things are good and they've got things resolved. Go ahead.
How did they keep up with all those scrolls? Because the Bible was just being written.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting with I don't know. That's a good point. That's a good question. I mean, because the letter is written, it wouldn't have been, put on a nice 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and put in an envelope. No, it wouldn't have happened. That's a good point. I don't know. I know couriers. We use courier service now, and we put a letter together and we put it in a special situation, and the guy takes it, goes, that type of thing. I would assume something similar. But, like particularly in Phoebe's case, going to Rome, that's the only thing that she's taking as far as, a letter to the church there is concerned.
Scroll.
You're right. Something like that. Yeah, you're right. Good question. Good thought. Go ahead. Come. I'm waiting on you. Go ahead.
Hey, what church says Paul, when he met to break bread up here, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together.
You're ahead of me.
I know it. But we said something about it one time.
Yeah.
Did he preach from morning till midnight that night?
Shh, don't tell Billy that. We don't let Billy read that.
Them people didn't go, people had to eat just like they do today.
I would thought so.
Where did they get something to eat? They had to take the bread.
There wasn't a McDonald's there?
John, they was eating the word.
We don't know. Luke doesn't tell us that. But it's good. I mean, it had to happen.
And they had to have something because people ain't changed.
There you go.
People,
You're absolutely right. But don't tell Billy about that preaching the midnight
The
thing.
fact that is when he raises the boy, and they do eat.
Yeah.
They do eat a meal.
Yep.
But you don't know what time you started. It might have been 15 before.
I think 12 p.m. noon too.
Okay. Just quickly, as far as what the book of Romans we were talking about that Phoebe was carrying, this is just a brief overview of what was in the book. Again, the idea of justification through faith in Jesus Christ, not the Old Testament law. Familiar theme. Okay, familiar theme. It's about Jesus and the new law, not the Old Testament. It's got to keep being presented over and over again. God saves all believers, Jews or Greeks. God accepts all who believe in Him. Again, that would have struck directly at the letter written back in Acts 15. Okay? Everybody's included now. All right, and then finally Paul discusses the principles of Christian conduct in the book of Romans. And again, these are just quick overviews, but it lets us know the theme of what he communicates to them, actually long before he gets there to Rome as a prisoner. So he continues his route and moves on back there. Verse. I just happened to think. Before I get too far into that, we probably ought to take a look at the questions on 19. Good idea. Let's do that. Let's do the questions before I get too much further into 20. It's so easy to hook the two together. But I want to take this and let's do the questions on chapter 19. Okay? All right, number one, what baptism had the men of Ephesus received? Okay. John's. When did the Holy Ghost come upon these men? There you go, exactly. How many were baptized again? 12. Okay. Where in Ephesus did Paul teach? And?
That school of Tyrannus.
There you go, both. There you go. How long did the dispute? Did he dispute in the school of Tyrannus?
2 years.
Okay. Where's Paul? Were Paul's miracles at Ephesus ordinary? Why?
People will take handkerchiefs and stuff.
There you go.
And they get well.
Good. Who tried to cast out the evil spirits of the men of Jesus?
7 sons of Sceva.
Okay. Did it work? They took an awful whipping, didn't they? All right. What was the value of the books that were burned?
5,000 pieces of silver.
5 or 50? 50. One more than 0. Okay. All right. Where did Paul plan to go from Ephesus? All right, Macedonia, Achaia, all of that. Okay. What silversmith stirred up the Ephesians? Okay, who was the goddess of the Ephesians? Okay. What man quieted the assembly? Town clerk. Okay.
Is Alexander the town clerk, or those two different people?
I think they're the same guy. Well, I don't know. I don't know if they give us a name.
It said city clerk.
That's what I thought. It
A
just
couple verses before that talk about Alexander. I don't know if it's the
They
same.
put forth Alexander, and then he quieted the.
okay.
Verse 28. And when they had these sayings, no, wait,
Maybe 33.
yeah. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, and the crowd put
Yeah, it was.
forth, and Alexander beckoned with his hand and would have made his defense unto the people.
So it's-
they knew that he was a Jew.
So it's a different guy. It's not. Alexander's a Jew.
Yeah.
And they told him just put a lid on it. You ain't talking. And the town clerk's the one that takes care of it. He must have had quite a bit of horsepower to be able to control something like that. That's pretty cool.
I guess he was a Roman, but
I would assume, sure, probably somebody in that with that kind of authority. Yeah. What was baptism significant in Paul's preaching?
Yeah.
Across the board, it is across. Was it wrong to is it wrong to dispute about God's word?
no.
Right. Reasoning from the scripture. That's what it's about. How did the word of God prevail in Ephesus?
Reminded.
Mixed,
Eating daily.
vitally mixed, riot, under control. Just all of that. Yeah. Why were the silversmiths disturbed by Paul's preaching? Gonna hit him right in the wallet, wasn't it? You bet. All right. Did the preaching of the gospel allow for continued practice of the religions of men? No, it does not. It does not. Okay. Told you 19 and 20 was going to be wild this morning. It's good. All right. So now as we move along, John will catch up with you here in a minute. Okay. Verse 5, when they'd gone ahead waiting for us in Troas, we sailed from Philippi, and that's how we know that, the we and Philippi is where Luke was. After the days of the unleavened bread, we came to Troas within 5 days, and we stayed there 7 days. And on the first day of the week, when they gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to depart the next day and prolong his message until midnight. I think it's important. There's a message here. What is it? What is it? How long did he wait?
5 days, or 7 morning.
How long did he got there, and how long did he wait?
7 days.
What happened on the seventh day? You think that's a valid point? I think Paul recognizes the importance of that, not only for himself, but for the folks there too. It's important to assemble. It's important to partake of the Lord's Supper and worship God the way that we should. And he kind of puts an underline and an exclamation point after that. I mean, why hang around for 7 days? He valued what was going on. It was important. It should be important to us as well. And there's an underlying message there that's really, really, really special. Okay. And so he preaches to midnight. Billy, you didn't hear that. And there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together, and a certain young man named Eutychus sitting in the windowsill, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep and fell down from the 3rd floor, and they picked him up dead. But Paul went down and fell upon him, and after embracing him, he said, "Do not be troubled, for his life is in him." And when he had gone back and had broken bread and eaten and talked with him a little while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took away the boy alive and were greatly comforted. We can begin to understand a lot of things there, but what's the underlying result of what takes place? Preacher shouldn't preach till midnight, right? No.
Well, let's go for this one.
Huh? need to have more content to their sermons better than that so people don't go to sleep. No, that's not it either.
Right there was another place where people get a lot of this stuff. It says when he therefore was come up again and had broke bread and had eaten and talked a while even till daybreak, so he departed.
Mm-hmm.
So he broke bread and ate at the same time.
Right. He broke bread and had a meal and left.
Which that would be Monday anyway.
Yeah, I mean we're into Monday now.
Now, it says he preached till midnight, don't it? One minute after midnight is Monday.
There you go. All right, so he makes his plan and he leaves and continues the trip. There's a lot of information, a lot of things that we're able to put together, and we want to give that good attention as he continues the route, because he's gonna move on down. He's going to get to the Isle of Miletus, and that's where he's going to call for the elders from Ephesus to come down and meet him there. Now, why he doesn't stop at Ephesus, I think we can kind of understand that. There's no point in shaking things up if you don't have to. And it's a different meeting. It's a different thing. Go ahead, Billy.
Well, I was going to go back to what John had said there. John, it's like today, when we get through with their services, what do we do?
Yeah, but you ain't gonna wait till 12 o'clock or what we do at 11:30, and then we disassemble church. And then, but he said that at 12 o'clock they broke bread and then eat. Now, he didn't say there's a span between there. Of course, he may be, and we don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Where were they at when they did this?
That's in the house.
They were in a house.
Yeah, but they still breaking bread. If you have a church in the house, same thing happens.
No, it ain't.
If you go to my house, we all visit my house, and we have a worship service, and we break bread, the Lord's Supper, then we just go ahead and eat.
No, we did. They'll dismiss, and then we go ahead and eat at your house. Here's the thing about it. At your house, is your kitchen necessary for you? Is your bedroom necessary for you? Is it necessary for you to have them same things here?
I'm just, they didn't put, it ain't, you know, the way it grew up in here, that's how people get, certain people, you know, read.
Well,
And
what
it's different, it just didn't say it.
Well, what people do is, see, they jump to that and they take it out of context of what
Right.
the Bible actually
But
is
them
saying.
preaching till 12 o'clock didn't sound right to me.
Well, listen, when people got great interest in the gospel, they will. We have,
There's just-
I kind of sit and talk about the Word of God up to 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning.
And there's just some folks thicker than others, right?
You got that right, Ron. You got that right.
That's been your name.
All right. Okay, listen. We'll pick up here Wednesday night with verse 13, because as he gets to the Isle of Miletus and he meets with the Ephesian elders, it's a total different thought process that we need to give some thought to, and we'll do that and pick that up Wednesday evening and do the questions on chapter 20. Any thoughts, questions, or anything? Go ahead.
The first century church was not like it is today. They met daily.
Yeah.
And they preached, they ate with each other.
Right.
Okay.
Different deal. You're right. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your help this morning.